I'm Beverly Hosford, and this is my friend Erin Nitschke. We're doing a Facebook Live today for the National Federation of Professional Trainers, which is a personal training certification organization. We also do continuing education for trainers and business support, and now we have this live show that we've been doing for a couple months. So if you're here with us, say hello. And how are you, my friend Erin? What's going on?
I'm doing okay. I'm battling a little bit of a cold thing right now, so if I cough during, I'm sorry, viewers.
Yeah. Oh, just don't give it to me, all right?
I'll try not to transmit it through the through Facebook Live. How are you?
What's the weather like in Wyoming today?
It's actually really sunny. I woke up this morning and there was frost on the ground, and now it's beautiful. There's not a breath of wind. I'm looking out my office window right now going, wow, that changed quickly.
Great. Yeah.
No snow yet, at least in Sheridan.
No
yeah.
Snow. Yeah, we've got snow last 2 nights, and it's 5 degrees here, but sunny. So definitely, it's amazing how different it can be if it's sunny versus cloudy.
Yeah.
I would say sunny and cold over cloudy and warm because I like the sunshine for sure. How do you get your dose of sunshine in the winter?
Well, I do have like a little sun lamp that I'll use.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. And fortunately, we've got a really large backyard, so we'll take the dogs out, and I'm not a huge cold weather person, so I really have to be motivated to bundle myself up and go out there and stand there for 10 minutes or so. But it's a little bit easier now with Olivia just because, you know, we like to take her on walks and she loves being outside. So it's a little bit easier now. I have that extra reason to, okay, let's go get some sunshine.
Yeah. As I've been learning more about sleep science, it's been brought to my attention about like the lack of sunlight that we get in the winter in this part of the country and how it can affect your circadian rhythm. And so, yeah, I've heard about these like sun lamps you can get, or is that, so that's what you have? It's like got the UV, whatever number.
Yep. My mom actually got it for me for, I think, Christmas one year, because the office that I had, just like, you'd swear it was a prison cell. It was all cinder blocked walls. There was absolutely no natural light. So it was just kind of a dungeony kind of office. And so she had got that for me because I was like, I really feel like I'm lacking in some vitamin D here. So she got that for me, and I really like it. It's still great to use, even though I've got a home office now, but.
So do you have to put it, because I've heard your back absorbs vitamin D the best from the sun. Did you learn anything about that, like with the lamp? You just put it in the room with you and it's just on your face?
Yeah, it's kind of off in a corner of my desk, so it's not directly on my face, but it's got enough ambient lighting that, maybe it's placebo in my head, but I think it works.
Interesting, because it's something I've been reading about lately and thinking about getting one, because it seems like a big part of the health picture. You know, a lot of people are feeling sad, seasonal affective disorder in the winter, and I know one of our authors wrote a few blogs about that last year, and I guess I kind of feel the sad a little bit, but once I found out it interferes with my sleep, being how obsessed I am with sleep these days, I was like,
Maybe there's something to that.
Yeah, my husband used to live in the Pacific Northwest, and he said he'd go to the tanning bed once in a while to get that. Yeah, it's really interesting. So if you're with us, we were just chatting a little bit about sun lamps and winter, and so if you have any thoughts, like tell us, do you have a sun lamp at home? What do you do in the winter to keep yourself happy and upbeat? How do you get your sunlight? I know I like to go out Nordic skiing, but I'm wearing a hat and I've got on a scarf, and like I think the only part of my face getting vitamin D is like right here. So
yeah.
I might have to like get a little more brave this year. But the new thing we've been doing lately is going to the hot springs, and that's one way I feel like you can get your skin under the sun in the winter, because the water is warm. And so I think I might have to do that, maybe invest in that this winter. So
yeah, that's a good idea.
You have hot springs in Sheridan?
No, we do not.
You're just gonna have to come up here to Bozeman.
I was gonna say I'll just travel up north. That's fine. Gives me an excuse to go someplace.
Totally. All right, well, I see we've got some people with us, so say hi, introduce yourself. Today we're talking about the rotator cuff, everything rotator cuff. And we were just talking before the show about how this is such a really awesome part of the body. It's a really fascinating area. It's really important, the muscles and the rotator cuff, which I guess we should just mention those real quick because there are 4 of them. When I teach anatomy, I use an acronym called SITS, and it's the supraspinatus, the infraspinatus, the teres minor, and the subscapularis. And I've got Andy here. I'll just show you real quick. Oh, then we can chat. We're going to chat a little bit more about like the issues with it, but let's just make sure. So this is your scapula bone. Oh, his head's on backwards though.
I was going to say, what's going on there?
So your scapula is kind of funny because you can't really feel it on yourself, but if you have someone else, you can, if you can find this ridge, the spinous scapula, it's kind of easy to remember the muscles if you understand that supra means above. So the supraspinatus is above the spine, supra, above the spine. The infraspinatus is below the spine of scapula. The subscapularis is under, sub, like submarine. And then the teres minor attaches on the lateral border of the scapula. So you have your triceps, your teres minor, and then your teres major. So teres minor is like kind of in the middle here. And then the other part to know, so when you break it down like that, I feel like it's a little more simple. And then the other major part to know is here on your shoulder, on your humerus, you have this groove. And I think it's easier to just find it on yourself. So if you want to know where the other side of these muscles are, you just find the front of your shoulder and rotate it back and forth. You should be able to find that groove. That's where your biceps tendon goes through. And on the anterior or front part of the groove is your lesser tubercle. It's smaller. And then on the other side, on the lateral or posterior side of the groove is your greater tubercle. It's a little bit bigger. And 3 of the muscles attach to that greater tubercle, and 1 of them attaches to the lesser. And the one that attaches to the lesser is the only one that's on the front side of the scapula, which is the subscapularis. So it makes sense that that smaller tubercle only has 1 muscle, and the bigger one has 3. And the subscapularis is the only one that faces your ribs. So it comes to the front, and then the other 3 attach to the greater tubercle. So little anatomy review there. That's not really our goal today to go over the anatomy, but just to kind of go over that. And if you have any questions, please ask. But we were chatting about how important these muscles are, but we were also talking about how they almost get overly, I don't know how to put it, Erin. If you can.
They get mad attention, maybe when they don't need to. I mean, they're not to discount the importance of them. They're absolutely critical muscles, but, you know, oftentimes you hear, and I hear this a lot, that, oh, my shoulder hurts. It's got to be my rotator cuff. Oh, I did this. It's got to be my rotator cuff. Maybe, maybe not. And so I think understanding how the anatomy works, but then also how to stay injury free and how to stretch those muscles, you know, but they tend to get mad attention when there's other things that are around that area, that joint.
Yeah, it's a complicated joint because the scapula is a floating bone and you have muscles attaching on all sides of it. I think there's like 20 muscles attaching to your scapula. And so if the rhythm is off, if one side is pulling more than the other, I'm just realizing, were you able to see the scapula when I showed it before? Because I was looking at my wide screen. Okay, tech thing.
No, you could.
If you've got like uneven pull of any muscles in your shoulder or your scapula, it's going to cause an issue. The reason the rotator cuff gets so much attention is a very good reason, is that when you go to lift your arms over your head, technically that infraspinatus especially, and that supraspinatus and your teres minor are going to externally rotate the shoulder so that those little bumps that we were talking about, the greater and lesser tubercle, don't hit your clavicle when you're coming up over your head. Like, try to internally rotate your shoulder and lift them up. It doesn't really work. It needs to externally rotate and come up. And your body kind of does that naturally, which is why I'm a little bit like, yeah, it gets mad attention, because your body's not really gonna not do that. Like, when you lift your arms up, it's gonna do it on its own. You don't really need to train yourself to do that, but strengthening the muscles is always beneficial. But to me, it's kind of like the posture thing. Like, I'm gonna do rhomboid exercises, you know, upper back exercises, and then I'm gonna have better posture. And yes, it's definitely gonna help support better posture. But in my mind, better posture comes from awareness. And so we also need that with the rotator cuff. We should definitely do rotator cuff exercises. They're really important, but you also need to pay attention to your upper, middle, lower trapezius, which anchor the scapula, your rhomboids. You need to make sure you're working all three of your deltoids. You need to work your pecs, pec minor, pec major. I love the serratus anterior. I feel like that's one that really gets underlooked. And so you really need to make sure you're covering all your muscles, not just the rotator cuff when you're doing training, not just that one area.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what causes that to be gets the great attention that it does, because there's so much else in that joint that we need to train that equally, and we need to make sure it's flexible and pliable, and yeah, it's not just those four muscles. So I think that's an important thing to drive home, is your shoulder's comprised of a whole lot more. That entire compartment is not just those four muscles.
Yeah, definitely. I think it gets a lot of attention because the biceps tendon runs through that groove, and if it gets pinched, if the shoulder is not aligned properly and it gets pinched, then it can cause a lot of pain and issues. So doctors will prescribe rotator cuff exercises, because by externally rotating the shoulder and doing exercises to help with that, it is kind of like the posture thing. Like we generally do, we round our shoulders, we internally rotate, we hunch forward. And actually, so I have a friend that does social media counseling, if you will. She's a social media expert, and she has a group that meets regularly in a room, like at a coffee house, and they all do their social media together so that like they can support each other. Basically, it's a social media support group. Kind of cool.
I love it.
She took a picture of them recently and put it on Facebook, and she asked some question about social media, and I was like, I'm sorry, I can't get past the fact that everyone in the room looks like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone in the room was hunched over with their head forward. I'm like, can we please get some, just get everyone to sit up taller in your social media? I know, I need to sit up.
I know. As you're describing it, I'm all, oh yeah. And
so I feel like a lot of our shoulder problems come right from that, right off the bat. Just not paying attention, sitting like this all day. And so if doing rotator cuff exercises with your clients helps bring awareness into that, then that's awesome. That is great. I think that's where it can really, come into play and really help people out. But should we talk a little bit about rotator cuff exercises? What are some of the ones that you do? What are the classics?
So it depends on the level of the client, but you can always do external, and I don't know how well you can see. It's always hard to describe something and my camera is like this small, so I can't ever tell, but you can do external rotation. So you can pull against resistance, and you can, for those that have a hard time keeping their, you don't want your chicken wing flying out. So you don't want to be doing this. So you want to keep your elbow into that rib cage, wad up a towel or other implement that you can kind of cue your client to keep that there and just pull against the resistance. So you're really isolating those muscles in external rotation. Then you can flip directions and you can pull against resistance this way and bring it medial, bring it internal. And that way you're balancing out both sides. And there are other things you can do. You can do a scarecrow. So keeping your arms at 90, and you don't even need weight to do this, just to be able to feel the stretch in those muscles. And you don't need a lot of weight. Like start with 5 pounds and just, you can do it unilaterally. So you can make sure that I don't think you can actually see my whole arm, but just to make sure that you're keeping it at a 90-degree angle. That's one other exercise you can do. And then sometimes I'll do a side lying exercise where I'll have them, be on their side, just completely flat, head propped up. Or if it feels more comfortable, they can rest their head, and then you just do something like that.
Yeah, I always like doing a sequence where, you're talking about the side lying. I would do all my hip abduction exercises with clients, and then have them do the rotator cuff in between when their hip was burning. Take a break, do some rotator cuff, lean on your side. But yeah, I think the key is definitely to make sure that everything is stable and in alignment, because you see people doing rotator cuff and their shoulders hunched up, or
keep the shoulder away from the ear, even when you're stretching it. I see a lot of people do this. Keep it low, cross that chest. We don't need to raise it up here.
Yeah, that's where those other muscles come into play, like your lat and your lower trapezius, helping to anchor the scapula down. So you do need to work those muscles as well, and you need to make sure they're all balanced. Which the only way to make sure they're balanced is just make sure you're covering all of your bases. But we know what I find is funny. So like when a doctor says like, oh, they need to work their rotator cuff on the right arm, and then they come in and you're doing exercises for the right and left side and they're equally strong, everything seems normal, and you're like, so what's the big deal here? But then sometimes you see one side is weaker than the other, and when you see that one side is weaker than the other, like it's harder to do or they need a lighter weight, then you can really make a difference for somebody. And yeah, one of my favorite things to do with the rotator cuff, to be more careful, because it is an area that if it's not aligned properly, you can get into trouble. And a lot of people will actually rotate too much, and then you're not working your infraspinatus and your teres minor anymore. Now you're working your rhomboids, which is fine, and maybe your rear delt. But a lot of people just go too much range of motion. So what I tell people is do both. Do some with smaller range of motion and do some with larger range of motion. So you give your smaller muscles a chance to work, and then those accessory muscles a chance to work. But I like doing holds, isometric holds.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if I'm like, how can we show this? Like, so if you're holding a band in your hand and the band would come this way, basically, and you just hold it here, because then the band wants to pull you in, and you have to hold it here. And then that way you can stand there as the trainer and you can monitor their shoulder and their alignment, because when people are moving, it's a lot harder to monitor the alignment. But if they're just standing there and just holding it, the band is doing the resistance, and then you're like, hey, you know what, let's retract your shoulder a little more. I want you to anchor your scapula. I want you to use your serratus. And I like to touch people when I'm doing that, and I ask them, I say, hey, you know, can I touch you? And I'm going to put my hand on your ribs, and I say, can you anchor your, I should probably show you. I'll say, like, let me see here. I'll like put my hand here and say, hey, can you anchor your scapula down? And when I do that, I can feel my serratus right there. Right. But of course, asking if you can touch people, which is a topic we're going to tackle here in the future.
Always a good one. I'm going to adjust my blinds real quick. Does it look like sun is crossing my...
It's coming in.
Dang it. Okay. Hang on.
You're getting sunny. So yeah, with the rotator cuff, I think, you know, it's a great area to work, but make sure that you're, you know, being really careful. Make sure you're working other muscles. Also, make sure that you are being careful with it, because that bicipital groove is there and that biceps tendon runs through, you can very well pinch the biceps tendon while you're doing rotator cuff exercises. So a rotator cuff exercise can actually make the situation worse instead of better. And so it's very important to understand the anatomy and the mechanics of the shoulder. And that's where, you know, if you don't have a skeleton at your gym, sometimes you can get the owner to buy one. I always brought Andy to my gym and kept him there, because you can really understand the shoulder joint anatomy better when you can see it, and you can appreciate how fragile this is, because the humerus is sitting on such a small space here. So I highly recommend every gym that's committed to education and to helping their clients prevent injuries, consider buying a skeleton, because it will help the trainers. It always helped my clients to understand what was going on under their body. And if you can't afford a skeleton, one of those muscle charts or one of those bone charts works well too. But yeah, so yeah, Erin, while you were fixing your blinds, I was just saying, like, I think our key points around the rotator cuff are make sure you're not just working those muscles, make sure you're working deltoids, traps, rhomboids, serratus anterior, even like your scalenes come down into your first rib, and maybe you don't need to work them, but maybe you need to teach people how to like lengthen through there, like to just kind of open their neck up while they're doing their exercises. So I am an anatomy nerd at heart, and
you're very good at it.
Knowing your anatomy, because when you know it, then you can really account for things. And then my favorite part about knowing muscles like the rotator cuff is then if your client is saying that your doctor wants them to work the rotator cuff, that's an opening for you to build a relationship. And that I'm going to let you talk about that, building that relationship with a doctor. So understanding the rotator cuff, why would that help us with getting more clients?
Right. So building that relationship with the physician, there's a couple of things that I would always do with clients. And that's one thing. I always have them list their primary physicians. I don't cold call them or anything like that, but I just like to have an idea of who treats them for different things. And then as soon as they have a script from their doctor, I will follow up with that phone call and say, this is who I am. This, I've received this script, and here's what I plan to do with your client or with your patient to address whatever, imbalance is going on, whatever injury or something like that. And then I think giving the doctor progress notes, and then that's where you need to reevaluate the flexibility. There's a ton of different exercises. You can use a goniometer to assess degree of motion, all of that, but reassessing it over a period of time and then providing those updates. You can rely on your client to do that, but I don't know how often somebody goes to the doctor every 2 weeks, So again, it's that open door to say, this is who I am, and this is what I plan on doing. And I think it's always good to ask, do you see any contraindications? Do you see anything that might be a problem for this particular client? That's always a safe question to ask, because even though you might not see something, the physician might say, oh, well, here's something that I'm concerned about. Chances are probably not. If they've already said you need to work your rotator cuff, they're probably not going to supply that person with a list of exercises. So that's your job. So again, just communicating that this is what I plan to do with this person.
Yeah.
And build that relationship from there. But it's not necessarily a one and done. I think whatever progress that you make with a client, that's something that should go in their chart. Not just with you, but with the physicians. You could easily, fax a copy, or you could have the patient or the client give it to their physician, any number of ways. But again, documenting what you've done and the progress that they've done, and then noting the differences in the flexibility from start to finish. Because the muscle, its strength isn't just about what the force that it can resist or that it can move. It's also about its flexibility. So that's something that's important too, is rotator exercises. And any exercise is not just about, we need to make it stronger. You also need to make it flexible. So focus on those two things, because we tend to, focus on, we got to strengthen it. We got to tone it. We got to do this. We got to do that. But then it's only as strong as it is flexible. So we need to make sure that we drive that home too, that here are the exercises, but then here are the stretches. And you can prescribe the stretches to them to do on their own, 4 to 5 times a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think so when someone comes in and says to you, I need to work my rotator cuff, or my doctor said, right, my reaction a lot of times would be like, oh gosh, here we go with the rotator cuff. But I think on the positive side, you should get excited, because it's a channel to potentially communicate with the doctor. It's like, amen, the doctor is speaking my language. They're talking about muscles and exercise. So now you have a doctor who's with it. Doctors, unfortunately, don't know much about doing exercises like that. That's not what they do all day. And so then you can open up that relationship, like you were just saying, Erin. So I think and then you also have the ability now to educate to say to your clients, so you need to work it, because I had clients that come in and say, I need to work my rotator cup with a P. And I'm like,
where is that located?
Yeah, you're like, well, definitely we're playing a little bit of telephone game here. The doctor said something and the client interpreted, brought it back to me, and I'm like, the rotator cuff. I was like, interesting. Well, it's the rotator cuff. And I was like, I'll say, do you know what the rotator cuff is? And they're like, no, not really, but can we work it? And I'll say, well, there's actually 4 muscles. Would you like to learn about them? And some people are like, yeah. And some people are like, no, let's work them. I don't really care. But if you have someone that wants to learn more, then you have the opportunity to educate them on where those muscles are, like we were showing earlier in the show, finding the greater and lesser tubercle on them and showing them where that is, and showing them where their scapula is, which can be hard because it's behind you. But if you have another client or trainer that's willing to let your client touch their back, you can show them where it's so amazing how, people just, they have no clue. They're like, they don't realize they have these scapulas. Most people know the scapula because it will wing out, it'll, unlike kids when they're little and skinny and you can see, but most people don't have any clue where they are themselves. So what I will do is ask again, I'll say, can I touch you? And I'll put my hands on their scapula and I'll say, move your arms up and down. And I'll say, do you feel my hands moving? And I'll say, now round your shoulders and bring them back. And most people love that. They're like, wow, this is really cool. I had no idea I had those back there.
This is what they do.
Yeah, the rotator cuff can open up a wonderful world of rapport, connection, education. But just as we said earlier, remember there is so much going on. So like Erin said, I want to talk about this flexibility piece, is that when you're working the other muscles, you're actually stretching the rotator cuff while you're working the other muscles. So it is beneficial to have a well-rounded workout, because when you work one muscle, you stretch the other. But then to stretch like the whole chain, you want to definitely do some mindful, slow stretches for that. And you were showing me some before the episode. So let's go over some stretches.
Yeah. So one stretch that I really like to do with anyone, and I even do it myself, is if you take just the back of your hand and you put it just on your hip, and then you reach around and kind of pull on that elbow. You should feel a nice stretch across your scapula, or where you're, hi, Billy. I just saw his comment pop up. So do that, and then switch the other side. You want to have loose chicken wings. You want them to be able to move. The shoulder is a real mobile joint. It's hypermobile. I mean, it can flex, it can extend, it abducts, it adducts, it can rotate, it can do all of that. So that means it's susceptible to injury. And if there's no guarantee that making sure that you stretch all the time. So flip your hand around, Bev, like put the back of your hand, just bring it forward a little bit on your waist a little bit, and then pull forward.
Oh, come forward.
Yes. Like that. Yep, exactly. So you should be able to feel that across those shoulders, and you'll notice a difference on one side or the other. I mean, typically we have one side of the body that's stronger than the other. We have one side of the body that's more flexible than the other. So you need to just be very mindful about making sure you incorporate those exercises and those stretches. The thing with the rotator cuff muscles, and this is true for some of your other littler, smaller stabilizer muscles, is they're not always the ones that are the most present in a workout. We don't necessarily think about that when we're programming or when somebody's just like a recreational athlete and they're just working out, but they do a lot of work. And if you don't have strength in them and you don't have flexibility in them, chances are your other larger movements and larger muscle groups are going to be compromised. And that's where injury is going to set in. It is a hypermobile joint. It's also very shallow. If you look at it's a ball and socket joint. So if you look at the head of the humerus, so your arm bone, your upper arm bone, and where it sits in that cavity, it's a shallow cavity, which means it can be very easy to dislocate, to separate. You've got to strengthen those structures, but you also have to stretch them as well.
Yeah.
You can stretch it just even doing static holds as well, kind of like what you were talking about, just moving the resistance in a different direction so that you actually get that stretch across that shoulder.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I love the exercises you showed earlier where I'm going to see if I back up here, kind of playing around with the screen. Oh, if I back up enough, my carpet's in the way. But you were showing like these earlier. Yeah. I used to do those with all my clients at the end of their session. And then I have them do like this, where they're doing.
Oh, yeah, opposite.
If you do that, you'll feel like it does this nice twist through your chest, and it feels so good. Man, I need to do that. And then one of my other favorites is here, just like coming forward. Back. And it's going to stretch. So it's going to stretch all your muscles in your chest and your back. But I love the way that feels. And sometimes I would just have my clients lay on the floor at the end of their session with their arms out like this to the side, and just lay there, or just lay there like this for a few minutes. Because when the pecs get tight, man, like you're saying, some of these bigger muscles, some of these bigger muscles take over. Like, as I was saying in the beginning of the show, there's no way that your rotator cuff's not going to work. Like, it's there. It's going to do its job. Your infraspinatus is going to externally rotate your humerus. Your supraspinatus is going to help pull the humerus into the body so that it doesn't hit the clavicle. Like, that's going to happen, but it may not be as strong as it needs to be. So evaluating, like you said, using a goniometer or just testing someone's strength and seeing if they need to work that area is going to be really beneficial. I loved what you said about the goniometer earlier.
Yeah, I don't know how many, I worked in a physical therapy clinic, so that was a tool that we had readily available to us. And when I taught, we had goniometers as well that I purchased for my classes. So I don't know how many trainers in the industry use those as go-to tools anymore. I think it just depends, but I do like them because it can give you a very good idea of the degree of motion in any joint. It's a great way to measure progress as well. Especially if you've worked with a client that's got an injury and they're going to physical therapy, but they've, kind of been graduated to resume normal activity or something like that, you can still be on the same page with that physical therapist and notice that the change in the degree of motion they're able to achieve. So I think they're great tools. They're not expensive at all. Get a couple, keep them with you. You don't need, 50 of them. A couple sets or just 2 of them is just fine. But yeah, I think they're really useful tools, and I think they can do a little bit, I don't want to say exact, but just a different way of objectively measuring somebody's degree of motion versus just doing, we have the battery of stretches that we can do to determine somebody's flexibility in their back and in their hip flexors and all of that. But I do like the use of a goniometer because you can really look at that motion of a particular joint and what it should be like.
Yeah, it's a good tool to have in your box with fitness assessments. And with that being said, I want to mention, if you're someone that's really into biomechanics and measurements and everything, then it's a great tool and it can help you get the attention of a physical therapist or a doctor and get a partnership going. But if you're someone that more prefers doing like weight loss and, other things, then it may not be for you. Like that was one thing. I had students over the years that were kind of intimidated by how much I was into mechanics. And I'm like, hey, like you don't have to be a nerd about mechanics. It's totally okay. Like, just learn the basic rotator cuff exercises and learn some stretches and do them with people. And, maybe it's not totally your gig, and that's okay, but definitely be accountable. But you don't have to be as excited about it as I am.
Yeah. We think it's amazing. I think another point for trainers and just anyone that's watching this or that will watch it that is an avid exerciser or you're going to start exercising, making sure, like I said, that joint is very shallow. So you want to make sure that you're not placing it in a compromised position. So that means externally rotated and loaded. So for example, like a behind the neck lat pull. Mm-hmm. That just always, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard to me. You're placing the shoulder in an externally rotated position, and that's not bad, but then you're loading it. So you're working against resistance. There's absolutely no reason you can't just do a regular lat pull, bring it on down to the chest, pull it back up there, or push it back up. There's no reason you can't. Yeah. And same thing with like an overhead military press. If you've got a client that maybe doesn't have great core strength and you have them in a standing military press position and not using a staggered stance, and even if you are using a staggered stance to change that base of support, and you have them having dumbbells and then they go up overhead and they maybe lose their balance or that weight is just too much for those shoulders, it's going to externally rotate and chances are you're going to snap something. So making sure that you understand the effective exercises and the way that you can do them. We don't need to do behind the neck pulls and that kind of craziness, but just making sure that you're not compromising an already compromised joint.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where anatomy is so important to know, because if you know the origin and insertion of the muscle you're trying to work, you would see that you do not need to put your arms behind your head for a lat pull down, because with the insertion being in the bicipital groove and then going back to the rib cage, rotating your shoulder back is just actually stretching the lat, and that's not going to help it contract. If we want to contract the lat, we need to have it, more aligned. So exactly. That's the same thing with, there's a lot of exercises like that. I'm trying to think of, another example, like even just with bicep curls, like it's just like just shorten the joint. People will swing them up and that will work the long head of the bicep, but it's like if you're trying to build that bulk in the bicep itself, you want to get on that brachialis, which doesn't even have the word bicep in it. The brachialis is like the biggest of the bicep muscles, and it's this is so it's like the bicep muscle itself is actually kind of skinny. Let's see here. April, thank you for the stretching ideas. I need to utilize some of these. Computer work puts a lot of stress on my body. Yeah, totally.
Oh, absolutely. And use those stretches. Stretching is good anytime. I do not think it has to be isolated to the end of a workout, the cool down portion. It helps because your muscles are warm. You know, they're the most pliable at that particular point. But especially if you've got a desk job or you're a student, what do you spend most of your time doing all day? Slumped over at a desk, listening to someone like Bev and I yap on for, 50 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes, several days a week. So making sure that you, that you really use those stretches just to undo a day at the desk. That's one of the biggest problems is, like you were saying earlier, Bev, we're rounded and we're not, keeping the chest loose, keeping the shoulders stretched or strong. And then we often will just get up and we're still in that hunched position. So making sure that you check in with yourself and just you want to pull the shoulders back and down. And like you said, bringing an awareness to it. So use these stretches and exercises just even after a day at the office or a day in classes or something like that.
Find myself hunched over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Confirmed. Oh, Myra's here. I'm learning a lot.
Myra.
That's good. Well, and the last thing I wanted to cover today, because I always get asked by students or even like clients that are, should I do the rotator cuff exercise at the beginning of the workout, at the end of the workout? As we talked about, these are smaller accessory muscles, but very important. And my answer to that is like, I think you can do it either. You can use them as a warm up. Like some people feel like use them as a warm up, but if they're weak, they could get tired and then they may not be able to keep up with the rest of the workout. So then some people believe do them at the end because they're going to be participating. Like I said before, they're not going to check out. They are going to participate through your whole workout. No matter what you do, they are there. They just may not be as strong as they need to be. So you could do your whole workout and then at the end, whatever juice you got left in your body, you can do your smaller rotator cuff exercises. Those are my thoughts on it. What are yours about?
I'm with you on that. And I think it's very client dependent because like you said, they are accessory muscles, they're stabilizers, they're helpers, they're assistants. And so if you fatigue them early on, they're not going to be able to assist you in those larger movements. And so there is something to be said for working, your large multi-joint movements first down to your smaller single joint movements or large muscle groups to small muscle groups. You can be thoughtful in how you program it, but you can also integrate them. So you don't have to just completely do it at the end. I think it depends on your client. Because if like you said, they're not as trained or they're not as strong as some of those other muscles, I would maybe wait to put that towards the end so that they still have the ability and the power to assist with those larger movements.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of ways to do it, as you said. Like you could even do just like one or two in the beginning of the workout. We have another.
Hi, Chris.
Suffering from super. Yeah. Oh man, bummer.
Yeah.
You could. Thanks for saying hi, Chris. You could definitely. I feel like you could do one in the beginning. Like I know some people believe in like waking up the muscle, but that's where even like those. Again, you showed these earlier. Doing a couple of these at the beginning of a workout to like warm them up, or like I always like to do. As you were saying, you don't need to have weight to do. Like you could do a few gentle shrugs, which your supraspinatus will work a little bit when you're doing that, or you can just do a few arm up to the head and back down, like just a few things like that at the beginning of the workout without any added weight to wake them up, so to speak. And then at the end, you can do your strengthening or you could have a day where, like you said earlier before the show, like a prehab day. We don't do, prehab, I don't even know if that's really a good term to use as a personal trainer. What do you think?
Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes things just fly out of my mouth. I like to be.
I'm just curious. Like, I know we're not supposed to say rehabilitate. Like, we don't rehabilitate, but I hear trainers saying prehab. Like,
I think about it in terms of my responsibilities to keep my clients, my students, whoever I'm working with, injury free. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of that prelude to the workout in terms of, you've got to get a dynamic warm up in, and the dynamic warm up should mirror the muscles and the joint movements that you're going to work in the workout itself. Mm-hmm. Just calisthenics, do some body weight, like you said, doing those scarecrows with just no weight. That's how I think about prehab. I'm sure there's a ton of trainers out there that have maybe a different perspective, but I think about it in terms of, you know, that active dynamic warm up that is going to, one, assist my client in getting their body warm and like waking it up, as you said, but then also to make sure that I'm just not pulling them in from outside and say, okay, we're going to do 3 sets of 15, you know, transitional rest only, whatever. You got to make sure the body is prepared for the demands you're going to place on it. So that's what I think about in terms of prehab.
Cool. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because I've been working on a few projects lately in the industry where, you know, people are getting a little bit upset about some of the terminology that we use or don't use. Like, you know, we're not supposed to say prescribe, we're not supposed to say rehab. Like, so I just want to make sure we're covering our bases there. And yeah, that being said, I'm kind of excited about our topic for next week. So Is there anything else that you want to add about the rotator cuff? We covered a lot, boy, going on 40 minutes.
We burned through a lot of information really fast. No, I think I love Chris's comment about the fact that he's suffering from an injury right now because of not doing those exercises or not doing those stretches. So you've kind of got a live testimonial there saying that, yeah, I should have done these things.
Yeah. Don't wait till it's too late. Like, yeah. I like that. Don't wait for the doctor to tell you to do it. As a trainer, be accountable and do some rotator cuff work with your clients for sure. So yeah, we covered it all. If you're just joining us or you just got here, we talked about the anatomy of the rotator cuff. We talked about some of the major issues out there. We talked about ideas for programming, showed some stretches and exercises. So definitely rewind and watch and share this with people. Share this with other trainers, other fitness professionals, or probably anybody could benefit. So if you don't have any other questions for us, folks, we're going to wrap it up here because we could probably keep talking about the rotator cuff till tomorrow. So it's for four little muscles. There's a lot to say.
For sure.
So next week we're going to talk about touching, and may even get a little bit into some of the boundaries as being a personal trainer. Because I personally feel that touching is very vital to being a trainer, but some people feel that it's inappropriate, and so we're gonna dive into this topic a little bit. And yeah, even I had someone come into my anatomy session this summer, and they gave me a bad review. They said she had us touch each other, and I was like, well,
God forbid.
I was like, we're learning anatomy. Like, how do you learn anatomy without touching people? So anyway, we're going to talk about touching next week, maybe talk about massage for a minute. And also, Erin, you were mentioning something about boundaries, like, you know, when touching might cross when it might cross the line. So there's gray and what do you call it? Black and white and gray area there. So
yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Definitely. Well, thanks for joining us today, everybody. We're here every Wednesday, 11:30 Mountain Time, which is 1:30 Eastern Time. And please share this video with your friends and audience, and we'll see you next week.
Yes, thanks for tuning in.